Hey class, I just wanted to take a few minutes to go over the week 4 written response questions with you. Point out any that I think might be a little confusing or just need some clarification on. Don't forget this is a file submission, so you can use the Word document that I've attached to the assignment instructions, or you can create your own as long as it is clear which chapter and which question you are answering as you type out your answers. We have 3 chapters to cover this week, so I really went for what I felt were the most relevant questions from each chapter. Right. So our questions from chapter 6, remember chapter 6 was on recognizing, analyzing, and constructing arguments. Right. So question 1 has several parts to it. It says identify the issues in the following passages. Word all issues in the form of short questions. So remember, issues are the larger, more complex ideas, not the focused argument, right? So our first one here, the price of college education in Minnesota is going up again this fall. The University of Minnesota and the state's 2- and 4-year colleges are raising tuition by double digits. Higher education officials say while most students are coming up with the extra cash for college, the trend toward higher tuition is not sustainable in the long run. So what is the issue? The larger complex problem. B, by next June, over 1 million college students will graduate, many lost forever to the world of inertia and learned habits. While the debate rages about how the vegetarian movement can tailor its message to reach resistant adults, open-minded college students who care about animals are being neglected at an astounding rate. Our animal rights movement has not yet made a massive organized effort to reach our best audience. We could be making tremendous progress among this group of people using animal-related literature that has been shown to work. Again, what is the issue? What are the issues in this passage? And C, Tibet is backward. It's a big land, rich in natural resources, by way of, but we lack the technology or expertise to exploit them. So if we remain in China, we might get a greater benefit, provided it respects our culture and environment and gives us some kind of guarantee. So what is the issue? You can type each of your responses right underneath the passage. All right. Question 2, consider the following issue. Just think about it. Don't research it. All I want you to do is just think about this issue right here. Should the United States bring back the military draft? Just think about it. Take a few minutes to write down different concerns that arise from this issue. So you'll type those underneath 2B. And then C, to what extent does your list reflect your preconceptions about the issue? And then D, how might collaborative sharing / discussion give you a wider perspective on this issue? Right, so this is the issue. Should the United States bring back the military draft? Question 3, which of the following statements is a proposition? Explain why or why not. Remember, this is covered in chapter 6, propositions. So A, golly, is that a proposition? Why or why not? B, most college students gain a few pounds their freshman year. Is that a proposition? Why or why not? Right, so you'll do that for all 5 of these. Question 4, identify each of the following as an argument, an explanation, or a conditional statement. So read A, Jasmine really likes Daniel, but because she's planning on going to Guatemala for a semester to study Spanish, she isn't interested in getting involved with him right now. Is that an argument? Is that an explanation? Or is it a conditional statement? And that's all you have to do for these. So just after each one, tell me, is it an argument, an explanation, or a conditional statement? A through E. Question 5, break down the following argument. Now, this is where looking at chapter 6 is going to come in super helpful, the section on breaking down and diagramming argument. I'm not asking you to diagram it with the brackets and the highlighting and the underlining, which is what I did in the PowerPoint. I just have places for you to write, to jot down each element. So you're going to read the argument. For example, A says it is impossible to exaggerate the impact that Islam has on Saudi culture, since religion is the dominant thread that permeates every level of society. Looking at that argument, list the propositions. Then list the premises. Then list the premise indicators if there are any. Then list which statement is the conclusion. And then list any conclusion indicators if there are any. Again, you may have to refer back to chapter 6 to remember, first of all, just to refresh yourself on what propositions are, what premises are, what premise indicators are, what the conclusion is, and what conclusion indicators are. And then you're just going to list them. Again, I'm not having you diagram. All right, so there's A, B, C, and D for question 5. Question 6. Discuss whether the following are strong arguments. If you consider them weak, explain why. In chapter 6, the last part of chapter 6 was all about, the middle of chapter 6 was evaluating arguments, right? So, discuss whether the following are strong arguments. If you consider them weak, explain why. So, we've got 4 arguments there. So, discuss whether they are strong. If you think they're weak, explain why. Then we move on to chapter 7. Question 1. Indicate whether each of the following is an inductive argument, a deductive argument, or neither. Right? All you have to do is it an inductive argument? Then type that here. Is it a deductive argument? Type that here. Is it neither? Type that here. This is a one-word answer, right? Question 2. Evaluate the following arguments using the 5-step process under evaluating arguments that are based on generalization. So that's check whether the premises are true, decide if the sample is large enough, decide if the sample is representative, decide if the sample is current and up to date, and determine whether the conclusion is supported by the premises. You can find that little highlight box in chapter 7, right towards the end of the section on generalizations, right? So evaluate, these arguments based on that 5-step process, right? There's 4 of them. Question 3 is evaluate the following arguments using the 6-step process under evaluating arguments based on analogy. So again, in chapter 7, there was a whole section on analogies. Towards the end of that section, there's a little highlight box that gave you the 6-step process for how to evaluate an argument that's based on an analogy, right? So identify what is being compared, list the similarities, list the dissimilarities, compare the lists of similarities and differences, examine possible counter analogies, and then determine if the analogy supports the conclusion, right? You'll do that for these 3 arguments right here. And then question 4 is, of course, evaluate the following arguments using the 4-step process under evaluating causal arguments, right? So remember, the last part of chapter 7 is inductive arguments based on causal arguments. Towards the end of that section, there's a little highlight box that gives you the 4-step process for evaluating causal arguments. Determine whether the evidence for a causal relationship is strong. Make sure that the argument does not contain a fallacy, and there were 3 specific fallacies mentioned that are common with causal arguments. Decide whether the data are current and up to date, and make sure that the conclusion does not go beyond the premises, right? You've got 3 of those to look at. Then we have our chapter 8 questions. Question 1, the following arguments are all valid arguments, meaning the form itself is correct. So remember, when we're looking at whether an argument is valid or invalid, all we're talking about is the form, right? Determine whether each argument is sound or unsound and explain why. So remember, just because the form is valid doesn't mean the argument is sound or that the conclusion is correct. So what you're being told is these 4 arguments right here are all valid. They all have the correct form. Now what you have to do, what you're being asked to do, is determine whether they are sound arguments, right? and explain, or unsound and explain why. Question 2, identify what type of argument each of the following is. If it is an inductive argument, state which type of inductive argument. You might want to go back to chapter 7 for that. Remember, it's generalization, analogy, and causal arguments. So if you think it's an inductive argument, which one of those three is it? If it's a deductive argument, state which type of deductive argument it is, right? So we've got 6 of those. Yeah. So again, just if you think it's an inductive argument, what type? Go back to the 3 in chapter 7. If you think it's a deductive argument, what type? Okay. All right. And I believe, yeah, that's it for chapter 8. Like I said, we didn't cover all of chapter 8, so not nearly as many questions from that one. And you'll see a lot of those questions. There's not a lot of, there's a little bit of explanation that's needed for some of your answers. But for a lot of those questions, it's really just going to be like, you know, a 1 or 2 word answer. But if it does ask you to explain, make sure that you do, right? Just pay attention to the individual question each time you're looking. If you have questions, I would definitely review chapter 6 through 8, go back to each section if you need to while you're working on these questions, but don't hesitate to reach out. I will help you as much as I can, whether that is directing you to a specific part of the book, specific part of the video lesson, or trying to explain things in a different way than both of those options. I will do my best to help. Otherwise, you know, do your best and don't do the best you can. But I don't want you to stress out if this is not super easy, because it's like shorter answers than what our previous written response assignments have been. That doesn't make it easier necessarily. You know, dealing with inductive and deductive arguments, it can be some tricky business. So just do your best. And again, you can definitely reach out if you're really struggling. But I don't want you, I mean, this isn't a test, not an exam, right? Just do your best. Okay.